Okay, I would like to open up this session of the Legislative Oversight Committee. This is a statewide education improvement and assessment program review. And our committee is pursuant to RSA 193C:8-A. And today we have several items on the agenda. And on that agenda, of course, the first thing I'd like to do is welcome everybody here, and then to welcome on our committee those that are here. We have Representative Balboni, Representative Luno, myself, Rick Ladd, and we have Senator Ward. And Representative Spilsbury is on this commission, or this committee, and he is next door in finance right now. He said he'd be in here as soon as they're done our education bills on that side of the wall. So going on down into the committee agenda for today, under our new business, there are several items which I've listed there, and I'd like to, just mention them briefly right now. Curriculum frameworks, and that's an aspect of statute which we put into place several years ago, or it had been in place prior to that, and we put it back in place. And the other one is review resource elements in support of RSA 193E2A. And so what I'd like to do is just look at this packet right now, and I'll try to explain to you why I have put curriculum frameworks into the docket for today, because this is a very, very important area, which it's tied into our ED 306 rules. It's also tied into what we identify as an adequate education. So to begin with, on the packet on the second page, there's the definition of what the Legislative Oversight Committee is responsible for doing. And I've highlighted in a darker font that respecting the New Hampshire's long tradition of community involvement, appropriate means are established to provide an adequate education through an integrated system of shared responsibility between state and local government. In this system, the state establishes minimum standards for public school approval and academic standards for delivery of educational services at the local level. School districts then have the responsibility and flexibility in implementing diverse educational approaches to instruction and curriculum tailored to meet student needs. So in summary, we, the state, have the responsibility for developing those standards which are for the minimum standards for public school approval, and the state board has responsibility for the development of the academic standards. If you go to the latter part on the next page, we inserted into the oversight responsibility several years back in 2024 when we were reviewing the ED 306 rules. Item L here, review, and that's the responsibility of this committee right here. Review and make recommendations relating to academic standards under consideration by the State Board of Education pursuant to RSA 193E2A, Roman 4C, and the minimum standards for public school approval under consideration by the State Board of Education pursuant to the RSA 192A. So this committee now has the responsibility for looking at the academic standards, and when we're looking at changing those, as well as the minimum standards for public school approval. Going on to the next page, these are the minutes that came out of our June 13, 24 meeting. I'm not going to go through and reading them all, but I've highlighted certain areas which I think are apropos to what we're going to be looking at today. On the second page, or excuse me, no, I'm not going to read through those minutes right now. I'll jump to the next part, which is 193E, the adequate public education. We have these 11 subject areas, learning areas, which we consider necessary for an adequate education. English language arts, math, science, social studies to include those subjects within, arts education, world languages, health and wellness, physical education, engineering technologies, personal finance, computer science. Those are subjects or learning areas which we have within our adequacy program here in New Hampshire. On that next page, though, on lines 23, and starting at 21, neither the Department of Education nor the State Board of Education shall by statute or rule require that the Common Core standards developed jointly by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers be implemented in any school or school district in this state. If the local school board elects not to implement the Common Core standards or the Common Core state standards adopted by the state board pursuant to RSA 541A, the local school board shall determine, approve, and implement alternative academic standards. The state board shall not amend any existing academic standards and shall not approve any new academic standards with a prior review and recommendation of the Legislative Oversight Committee. In this paragraph, academic standards shall have the same meaning as it is in RSA 193, and the academic standards means what a student should know and be able to do in a course or at each grade level. That's on the next page. The General Court requires every 10 years that the State Board of Education and the Department of Education to institute procedures for maintaining, updating, improving, and refining the minimum standards of public school approval and the curriculum frameworks. This has now been inserted in curriculum frameworks for each area of education identified in paragraph 1. And those are those subject areas I mentioned earlier. Each school district shall be responsible for maintaining, updating, and improving and refining curriculum. The curriculum shall present educational goals, broad pedagogical approaches, and strategies for assisting students in the development of the skills, competencies, and knowledge called for by the minimum standards for public school approval and the academic standards for each area of education identified in paragraph 1. So again, we're referencing back to paragraph 1, which is those learning areas. The curriculum frameworks, and this is important, the curriculum framework shall serve as a guide and reference to what New Hampshire students should know and be able to do in each area of education identified in paragraph 1. Curriculum frameworks do not establish a statewide curriculum. It is the responsibility of local teachers, administrators, and school boards to identify and implement approaches best suited for the students in their communities to acquire the skills and knowledge included in the curriculum, to determine the scope, organization, and sequence of course offerings, and to choose the methods of instruction, the activities, and the materials to be used. And going down a little lower, curriculum means the lessons and academic content taught in school or in specific course or program. That's statute. So we now have placed into law that we have a responsibility to have curriculum frameworks which are inclusive of the academic standards available for our schools when they're developing their curriculum and scope and sequence of courses within their school district or school to implement it through their instruction. And looking at the next page, there's a table which lists the curriculum frameworks. Some of them are called frameworks, some are called guidelines, some are called academic standards. The arts education, which includes arts, music, dance, and theater, K through 12, was last written in 2001. The civics curriculum, New Hampshire Constitution curriculum, K through 12, was written in 2025. That was just recently done. Ovid Lamontagne chaired that study commission. 2018, computer science parts 1 and 2, the revised portion were adopted. Now, I'm not, and Nate Green from the department, Nate, you can join in anytime you want to if I'm saying something incorrectly here. When I see these dates, is that the date that, or does that signify that these were approved by the State Board of Education? Yes, okay, thank you. In 2014, the English Language Arts Common Core Standards Initiative were approved. That's in 2014. And if you go to the department site, you'll also find WIDA, Wisconsin Center for Education Research for grades 9 through 12. That's on there and lists language arts, etc. for those grade levels. Going down in 2014, the Mathematics Common Core Standards were adopted. In 2005, the Physical Education Curriculum Guidelines were adopted. In 2006, social studies curriculum guidelines were adopted. I have not found any guidelines or any framework for the Holocaust and genocide education. I have not seen that. I don't know if it's listed somewhere else, but I didn't see them in that listing on the DOE website. In 2018, the world language curriculum was adopted. In 2016, the next generation science standards were adopted. Missing, I have not seen anything for engineering, technologies, and applications, or missing, I haven't seen anything for personal finance literacy, and I understand some of that can be embedded in, but I haven't seen any standards for them or any kind of a framework for any of those subject areas. So what I'm trying to get at is the next page you can see, for saving another tree or two, I only printed out the New Hampshire curriculum guidelines, K through 12 for physical education. And I've been informed, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the academic standards, are the academic standards the curriculum frameworks? Are the curriculum frameworks, come on up, Brittany, are the academic standards contained within and identified in the frameworks? And for example, if you looked at the last one I put in here, I put in the framework for the arts curriculum, and they call that a framework. Some of the others are called guidelines. So there's terminology that maybe needs to be coordinated a little bit more. I noticed that within the arts curriculum, you'll see curriculum standard 1, standard 2, standard 4, etc. for grades K through 12 in dance. You see the same thing, what the student be able to do as performance indicators within the physical education curriculum for various grade levels. So we're using different terminology. And as when we did the 306 rules, I always questioned, so what are the specific academic standards? And I'm still confused on that, and I don't apologize for that. I just, trying to figure out this whole business here a little bit myself. But lastly, and in a minute we'll just open it up for discussion, knowing that the Division of Analytics and Resources, which you're the director of, Dr. Green, you're responsible for everything that's in RSA 193E, an adequate education, and the frameworks fall underneath that bailiwick. So then what I'm proposing, and I've worked with you somewhat on this, is that in order for us to have curriculum frameworks that are current and updated and reflecting the academic standards, I know the department needs help in doing that. You're short on staff. You have many positions over there on the paper. There's a position, but the position's not filled because of funding from the legislature. So, but if we're going to have curriculum frameworks, we have to have curriculum frameworks which are current, meaningful, easy to read, and really identify what we're supposed to be doing when we're as local school district developing our curriculum and instruction to get this curriculum across to the students. So I'm possibly thinking about taking what we have here as a potential amendment and sticking that on something here that we may have in a committee so we can get this policy decision moving forward, that there will be a curriculum frameworks and academic standards coordinator at New Hampshire DOE to help us manage our curriculum frameworks and academic standards. So with that brief synopsis, I'd like to open up for discussion. And Dr. Green, if you would like to say anything, I know I've talked with you on this. If you have any pearls of wisdom for us, I appreciate it.
Sure. So for the record, my name is Nate Green. I'm the Division Director for the Division of Education, Analytics, and Resources. As you mentioned, Chair, the statutes relative to adequate education fall under our division, as well as the state assessment, too. And so a lot of this is also influenced by and is influenced from the state assessment. It's confusing to us, too. So I have a doctorate in education. I've worked in public schools in New Hampshire for 15 years. I think part of the problem comes from we're using two names that in many places mean the same thing, and in some places mean different things. And I think it's a problem of looking back at the history of where standards have come from over the last 25 years. If you go back prior to No Child Left Behind, most of the standard sort of quote unquote conversation really was conversations about curriculum frameworks. It was about what's the progression that students move through as they go from first grade to second grade to third grade. And you created a framework to kind of help, your second grade teachers know what they needed to teach so they could get their kids ready for third grade and get third graders ready for fourth grade. And then you hit No Child Left Behind, and all of a sudden we have this increased focus on standards, standardized testing, and raising all students to specific levels of proficiency. And I think that's where you start to see more a blow up of the term academic standards. And academic standards come to mean very specific prescribed documents. What exactly should a second grader know and be able to do in math? What exactly should a fifth grader know and be able to do in fifth grade science? But that really only applied to things like math, ELA, and science, because that's where the federal funding was, that's where the national focus was. And so you see things like the Common Core standards come out of a lot of that. You see the next generation science standards come out of a lot of that. But then you have a lot of these other subject areas that didn't have this big national focus, like art, PE, and health. And so you have these things that were sort of more curriculum frameworks, a little bit more of a loose document from the 90s that continued to sort of translate in today. Some of them got renamed into standards. Some of them kept the old name frameworks. So in a lot of places, academic standards and curriculum frameworks mean the same exact thing. But I think when you look, if you tried to compare, let's say, the math standards to the art framework, there are differences because the art framework is much older and it was written with a little bit of a different philosophy and approach. It's a little bit looser of a document. It's not as prescriptive as, say, the math standards or the ELA standards. And again, I think part of that is just the way that these documents have kind of transformed over the last 25 years, where some of them had that extra focus because of standardized testing and others didn't. We don't test kids in art and we don't test kids in PE and health at a statewide level. So I think there's a couple places we could go. The easiest and cleanest thing, and I'm not saying it's the best thing, would be to say academic standards and curriculum frameworks are the same thing. We're going to call everything academic standards and just kind of, for lack of a better word, standardize it that way. And every subject area in 193E2 has to have academic standards. Or we can create a separate sort of definition of what in New Hampshire we mean by curriculum frameworks if we wanted to live separate from academic standards. We would still say every subject area needs to have a set of standards that describes what students should know and be able to do at each grade level in math, ELA, art, social studies, science. But a curriculum framework could be more the combination of the standards and then the actual curriculum and instruction. So that could include the way in which districts are teaching those particular standards. It could include products that districts have purchased, whether it's out-of-box curriculums. It could include textbooks. It could include additional support materials that are used for students to catch them up to grade level. And it can include different types of instructional methodology. So in ELA, you could include the science of reading as a component of a curriculum framework. It's an approach to instruction, but it's not really a standard. So I don't know if that is helpful, but that's, I think, where some of that confusion is coming from with these two terms that, for the most part, really mean the same thing.
So where I started getting confused on all this is back in 2024 when we're dealing with the revision of the ED 306 rules. And we had the front side of the rules and the back side of the rules. The back side of the rules had a lot of the curriculum information there and compressed in the ED 306 rules. But then there was a shift. And from there, it appeared that it was conveyed, at least to myself, that these academic standards now, call it what you may, maybe performance standards or competency standards, I don't know what it was, but performance standards are now part of the curriculum frameworks. Now,
So again, I think this is where that history kind of comes in, where we had a lot of those, what I would say, kind of subject area minimum standards. So when you go to the back half of the 306 minimum standards, you look at math, right? We've said in RSA 193E2, every public school has to teach math. Math as a subject is a part of an adequate education. And then you go to the 306s, and you had about a page or so that said math should include teaching geometry, it should include teaching algebraic concepts, it should include data and statistics, it should include fractions. But that was really just a page. What you also had was a set of academic standards that are separate from the minimum standards. And right now that's the Common Core for mathematics that the state uses. That's what's on the website. And that's about 120 pages long. And so while the minimum standard says, math should include things like geometry, algebra, the academic standards say in fourth grade, students should be able to manipulate single and double digit fractions in expressions. And so that's a really highly specific standard that we're saying by the time a kid gets to fourth grade, they need to be able to do this with fractions and expressions and ratios. That doesn't exist in the minimum standards. So the minimum standards, it's not really prescriptive. If I'm a fourth grade teacher and I need to know what I should teach in math in fourth grade, the minimum standards aren't going to tell me that. The minimum standards are going to tell me I have to teach math. What I really need to know is what are in those academic standards documents that live outside of the minimum standards. So there was conversation when that edit was going on about, do we pare some of those subject areas back and just say in the minimum standards, every student at every grade level needs to be taught concepts in math based on the adopted state academic standards or alternative academic standards if adopted by the local district. Because really teachers, when they're developing their curriculum, are going to the academic standards document. When I was a teacher, I never once went to the minimum standards to try to figure out what I needed to teach in chemistry, because the minimum standards just says you need to teach chemistry in K-12. And so if I need to know what in chemistry to teach, I would go to the next generation standards, and it would talk about, you need to teach the functions and components of atomic structure, neutrons, electrons, protons, nuclear energy, the way in which fission and fusion works. All of those are concrete standards in the next generation science standards, but they don't exist in the minimum standards. And if they did, the minimum standards would be 100+ pages for every subject area. And so you're going to go from what's currently maybe a 50-page document to something that's 1,000 pages, because you're going to have that for all of those academic subjects. But they do reference each other because we have an obligation, one as a state, to ensure that we have standardization across the state, that what you're getting in fourth grade in the North Country is the same thing that you're going to get in fourth grade if you're in the South Central region of New Hampshire. But then we also have very strict federal regulations that say we have to adopt statewide standards, and that we need to have our state assessment system based off of state standards, because you need a statewide assessment that is going to be fair and equal for all students in the state, regardless of what school district they're going to.
Yeah.
Representative, no.
No. Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. Green, for sort of sharing some thoughts on academic standards and minimum standards and curriculum frameworks and curriculum. And I, certainly not being an education doctorate, I certainly find it to be challenging to try to navigate through all this, despite having been on the education committee for quite a few terms by now. But was wondering if as we look at these things, and I sort of I took from what you were saying that maybe a term like curriculum framework could get tossed out and replaced with academic, replaced by something else. But also in your discussion about the 193E2A substantive content, where we talk about things like science is something that gets taught, and then in the 306 rules we say things like chemistry has to be taught. And chemistry isn't necessarily being taught in second grade, but science is being taught in second grade. And so now it sort of gets into the primary versus secondary. I mean, is this sort of like, feeding on itself? Like you start with primary school.
Yeah.
And the academic standards that are expected and what should be taught, and what students should know at what age or what grade level, and then that builds into a secondary. I don't know what we want to call it, educational period, academic period, and whether the student takes chemistry, biology, physics, and physics E&M in that order, or physics, then chemistry, then biology, and then physics too. It doesn't really matter unless one's a prerequisite for the other. But so now it sort of breaks down in. The academic standards even fall apart at that point too, because at what grade should a student know chemistry? I took chemistry in 10th grade, but there were plenty of seniors in my class too. So are you expected to know chemistry in 10th grade? Are you expected to know chemistry in 12th grade? Or are you expected to have students be able to take chemistry in high school, and maybe they don't want to take chemistry in high school. Maybe they take something else. And so, is this an opportunity, as we're trying to make things a little more clear, to really sort of step back, look at what we're trying to achieve at the during primary grades, what we're trying to achieve during secondary education, and how, how these things really, help school districts build out their program studies and what they're offering.
Sure. Yeah. So, and thank you for the question. It's very nuanced. Yeah. It's the sort of pointing out the difference between grade levels, because it depends on, I think, the subject area. Science is a really good example where they try to break it down kind of by grade ranges. And so when you look at the standards are always grouped into three buckets, three subject areas. So you have physical science. That's going to include physics, chemistry, sort of your I don't want to say hard sciences, but that's what I taught. So I'm partial to those ones more. But it's your kind of your analytical, lab-based, focused on energy, structure, materials, property sciences. Then you have life science, biology, human anatomy, physiology. You're going to see some of your ecology classes in there. And then you have earth and space science, so astronomy, meteorology. And the standards kind of break down each grade level by those three subject areas. So, in first grade, what should a first grader know about physical science? What should a first grader know about life science? And what should a first grader know about earth and space science? And it really is directed kind of at a developmentally appropriate level. Although in science, it's really more like a K-2 or K-3. In this region, what are you, as a teacher, teaching? Because you might not be teaching standalone science in first grade for buckets of time like we do in high school, right? It might be integrated into, your reading instruction, your writing instruction, but you're not going to necessarily have 45 minutes a day of science in first grade or second grade. And then it might be 3 through 5th grade is another region, 6 through 8. And then when you hit high school, it's very subject specific. You're taking chemistry, you're taking physics, you're taking biology, or you're taking anatomy. So the science standards are really kind of broken up in that progression. Versus math is very much by grade level. It's like in first grade, what do you need to know about, numbers? What do you need to know about expressions? What do you need to know about, simple ratios? Looking at here's a group of marbles and here's a group of marbles. Which group of marbles is bigger, right? Understanding kind of differences in size and things like that. Math starts to add additional categories depending on the grade level. So you don't really see any geometry standards until you hit about 3rd grade. So pre-K to 2 is really more about number sense. And then you start seeing geometry get added in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. Around 5th grade, you start to see things like data and statistics and probability get added in and those concepts. And then once you get to about 8th grade, you start seeing standalone subjects. You know, a lot of eighth graders take Algebra 1, for example. And you see Algebra 2, you see geometry, you see statistics, you see calculus. So a lot of the standards are kind of built in those progressions, if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense.
But I will say, none of that's in the minimum standards, right? So if I go to in the ED 306s, it's not going to tell me in fourth grade, here's the progressions, right? I've got to go to the academic standards, and the academic standards will tell me, okay, for fourth grade, here's what you should be doing as a teacher. Here's what your students should be able to demonstrate to you at the end of that fourth grade year. Yeah.
Representative Balboni?
Thank you. There will be a question in here. Just a little bit of background. I served on the curriculum cabinet and I'm pretty well versed in the development of those standards when back in the day. And one of the things that was very clear is that it was very much up to the school district to decide within those basic frameworks. And as you said, you pointed out the K through 2, and we knew when the science standards were coming up for the test in fourth grade, what needed to be known about that. I would say that a lot of those mathematics skills are embedded. Like you do get a little bit of geometry and so, but my question to you is, to me, that seems like a broad sense of what the Department of Education should be doing in reviewing those standards. I think in terms of our function here as an oversight is more to make sure that we're facilitating that process and making sure it's done. Because I think that anytime you go through a revision, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are so many other states that are in different stages of their own revisions. And I know that when we did it at a local level, we would look and see what the local districts were doing. And there was a lot of teacher-to-teacher interactions with coming down to deciding exactly when or how you were going to teach those specific skills. So do you see this how can we help the Department of Education facilitate this? Because I think we all have that goal. They are so old that they need to be updated and utilizing terms that make sense and some common approaches. You as you pointed out, the difference between the frameworks and the standards is all dependent upon whether you're looking at the state assessments. The mathematics and the English is definitely different than what you're looking at when you're trying to do more of an exposure-oriented curriculum in arts and music. So those terminologies might not be equitable, or your standards might be just a little looser in that respect. So how can we help the Department of Education get this done?
Thank you for the question. I think in the past, whenever we've done standards revisions, it's always been with a stakeholder group from the field. So a number of years ago, there was a concerted effort to update the state social studies standards, and that involved teachers from each level of schools, elementary, middle school, high school, that kind of sat down that, had experience in the classroom teaching social studies to say, what is it that you see is working? What's not working? What have you, if I'm an eighth grade teacher and I've been teaching eighth grade social studies for 10 years, I should have a sense of, have the kids been prepared coming up through 5th, 6th, 7th grade and to get to my eighth grade class? And if they're not, is there something missing in those standards that we should be adding in so that I'm getting kids that are prepared when they hit that eighth grade level or high school level when they get to that point? So I think any kind of standards revision, while it's led by the Department of Education, and we have great staff at the department, we have people that are experienced in curriculum instruction, so much of it, I think, also has to include teachers who are currently teaching it in their classroom, because the department staff are not necessarily the ones that are in classrooms right now seeing kids on a daily basis coming in. We have a good understanding of what the structure should look like and how to fit it in there. But, there's a lot of minutia in standards, and it's a lot of content. And so you need, those people who are most familiar at those grade levels to be involved in that process. And I will say it's a lengthy process. Standards revision is not something that you take up in April and you're done in May. It's generally a several months long process, and you go through drafts, and the way the statute's set up right now, you have interactions both with the State Board of Education, with this oversight committee in reviewing and looking at that. So there's a lot of touch points along the way as well. And most states approach it that way. Some states it's led directly by the Department of Education. Some states will put an RFP out and they'll contract with, an academic vendor that kind of has experience in leading things like standards revision processes that will put together committees and kind of lead the discussions and the groups. But most of it is really done with stakeholders in the field.
So Nate, we did a little of that contracting out with Discovery Education when we looked at the civics program. But in looking at this program, if I'm a local school district and I know that I obviously have some issues with my mathematics program, and there's a lot of things I can do. I can try to find out what the best practices are and try to find where the holes are, or I can just start all over. If I'm going to start all over, am I going to take out the curriculum frameworks? And there has to be a purpose behind those, because you also have a statewide assessment that should be aligned with our academic standards, because you don't want to test something that you're not teaching. So if I look at the curriculum frameworks here, and they would be the Common Core frameworks here, or in Next Generation Science, or the same thing in language arts, those areas I think were covered. But am I going to look at the frameworks and say, okay, now I'm looking for some materials to use in implementing these and instructing in the classroom? I want to get a curriculum that's going to do the job for me. Years ago, I could just go to Scott Forsman or Houghton Mifflin or Holkirk Brace or McGraw-Hill, and they usually aligned with various tests, whether it be the Iowa or whatever achievement tests. So, and you'd pick the achievement test which best aligned with what you were doing and what you wanted to get out of that, I guess. So I'm saying, I guess the question I have, if I'm going to update my curriculum, am I going to have current curriculum frameworks so that there I know where the standards are? This is what you're going to use for designing the statewide assessment. And right now we've dropped a lot of the other, years ago, I can remember we had a lot more than just English language arts, reading / math / science. We took social studies and put that down as in the bailiwick of the local, seeing that there is no assessment, which we had, and then we said, well, it's your responsibility to do this. So if I'm going to be looking at developing a social studies program, am I going to have to pull off those academic standards or frameworks? And are the current ones what I want to be looking at, or do I have to be looking at something that's more current? And then every district's going to be going different directions. And that might be good or bad. I don't know.
So the standards, we're required to have a set of standards for anything that we assess. So that's a federal requirement. And so I think that's where you see, a lot of focus put on math, ELA, and science. So I'll use that sort of.
But they're going to come at us with social studies.
Right. Yeah. So I'll use. Let's take a look at social studies, for example. So we have a set of, and I forget what we call them. So social studies curriculum guidelines that are up there. So presumably for the last 10, 15 plus years, if I am a social studies teacher and I need to really understand what am I supposed to be teaching in fifth grade? I'm a fifth grade social studies teacher. I want to make sure I'm getting my kids prepared in the way that the state has sort of set out that I should be doing that. What I should be doing is going to those social studies frameworks on the department's website, looking to see, okay, what is it saying I should be doing in fifth grade? And then looking at my classroom materials. Do I have a textbook that's aligned to those standards? Am I making sure that I'm getting my kids through all the progression of the standards by the end of that grade so they're prepared for sixth grade? Have I constructed my quizzes and my tests along the way to really adequately measure, the major touch points that I should be hitting throughout fifth grade in social studies? So if the state were to go in and change the social studies standards, and we're going to say, okay, we've taken some of the fifth grade standards out, we've added some new fifth grade standards in, and that goes through the process and it gets approved by the state board, by the legislature, that social studies teacher is now going to have to go to those new fifth grade standards and say, okay, does my current textbook still align? Does my set of quizzes and tests still hit the correct touch points? Are there any changes in sixth grade? Because I'm also getting my kids prepared to go into sixth grade social studies. Am I adequately preparing them for any changes that might have occurred in that grade? So, a standards revision takes place first. We do that work at the state level. But then the next chunk of work has to be a review of curriculum. And sometimes, depending on the revisions, that's a bigger lift or it's a lighter lift. There's some states over the last couple of years that they've gone through and they've done a standards revision, but they haven't added anything new. They've just gone through and they've taken some of the standards out. So if I'm teaching 8th grade and I previously, let's say I had 25 standards in math at an 8th grade level, and the state takes 5 out, most of my materials are still probably going to work, and I could maybe take a couple of things out because, well, there's 5 standards now that are not included anymore in 8th grade. So I look to see where were those standards being taught and how important were they to the progression that I was doing. So taking standards out or minimizing standards has a smaller impact on curriculum because you don't have to make as many changes. You can pull things out of what you're teaching, but you're not necessarily adding anything in. And presumably all of your materials, textbooks, quizzes, and tests all still are aligned to whatever standards are left because we didn't change those standards. We just took some out. If you add new standards in, or you start shifting standards from one grade to another, where we might say, we were teaching this in 6th grade, but we're going to move this standard to 5th grade. Well, now we've got to work with those 5th grade teachers to start teaching that standard because they weren't doing that before. That was a standard that was being taught in a different grade level. Or if you write whole new standards, you're going to want to make sure that your textbooks, your curriculum, and your instruction are responsive to any new standards that you didn't have before. So there's a lot of review that kind of has to go on after new standards are brought in or after a standards revision occurs. Does that sort of get at the question?
Sort of, but you're also going to have to be looking at your assessment tool to ensure that, you're not teaching at 6th grade, but you're testing for it in 5th grade.
Yes. So at the state level, there's a direct impact on the state assessment because our state assessment has to be aligned at grade level to the standards. So any changes we make to those standards, we then have to go through and we have to revise our state assessment.
And do we have to be aligned with what the federal is saying as well? Because you're, in accordance with ESSA, you have to have this assessment approved by them, correct?
The structure of the assessment, yes. So we can adopt whatever standards we want as long as we adopt them statewide. Yeah. So we can't say, here's 8 standards in math, pick which ones you want, because you have to have one set of standards that you align your state test to. Change the test, and then the structure of that test goes through peer review. USED will select a committee of assessment experts, usually people that are in role similar to mine at other state departments of education, and they get together and they review what you've done with your test. Is it fair? Is it valid? Is it reliable? Most of what they're looking for is not necessarily content. They're looking to see, does the test actually align to your standards, right? So you change math standards, you can't submit a social studies test, right? They have to be one-to-one. But they're really looking at it more from a statistical and a psychometric perspective. So you would run your test through pilot testing, and they're looking for things like, are the questions themselves fair and balanced? Are the results showing that no one student subgroup is underperforming every other subgroup? Is the test unfairly biased in some way towards some population of students? So that the standards are really state controlled and the content of the test is really state controlled. The feds are more looking at psychometrically, is it a fair test to students? As long as you pick a good vendor, you should end up with a strong assessment.
So is the addition of a person on your staff working in this domain of curriculum frameworks and academic standards a high priority of the department right now?
I would say not having a position to oversee this type of work is one of the reasons why the dates on this list are 2001, 2003, 2005, 2006, because we haven't had the resources at the department to do the level of standards revision and review that you need to actually do this work appropriately.
Yeah, Representative and then Representative Balboni.
Great. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. So has the department identified any specific areas where like New Hampshire kids are coming up short, either, when taking national tests or when going to college and saying, hey, wait, hit the brakes. I never, got the foundational, education in this, on these things, or in workforce. Are there things you've identified?
I'll start with academics, and then we can kind of chat about workforce, because I have some ideas around workforce, but not very much data. Academically, every state has to do the NAEP assessment. It's done every 2 years. It's a national standardized assessment. It's the best way to compare one state to another state. New Hampshire consistently is the top 10 states every single year. So New Hampshire, both in reading and writing and math and science, tend to be some of the highest performing students in the country. So that's good news, right? And we tend to, be within that top 10, 11 states generally. Do we have room for improvement? Absolutely. And we see that within our state assessment. Chairman Ladd and I have talked over the last couple of years about, again, trying to increase some of the resources the department has. We have a huge amount of assessment data. And so I would love to be able to have, a person or some people on my staff to dig into that assessment data. I've done some of that on my own, but oftentimes my time is kind of taken up more by doing a lot of this type of work and then overseeing personnel and working directly in the field with some of the fires that are popping up, whether it's, a building roof is starting to come down, or, I got a principal call in because they're trying to fill some vacancies. But there's a huge amount of data that we could dive into. Some of the limited analysis that we've done the last couple of years, we've started to look at, comparing things like absenteeism rates and test scores, and you see dramatic drop-offs. As kids increase in absences, the test scores go down. And it's a pretty sharp decline when you look at it. Kids that are missing more than 10% of school are seeing 30-point drops in their test scores. And you can see the importance of kids being in that instructional environment and getting that. And the more school they miss, the harder it is for those kids to catch up. And you see that exactly reflected in test scores. We've done a little bit of analysis into math. We know that there are specific topics and areas within 5th grade and 8th grade that students seem to really struggle with. We know sort of across middle school, geometry tends to be one of the lowest areas that kids struggle with. I'm sure there's a lot of additional insights analysis that we could do that I think would be helpful to schools and districts. But again, we don't necessarily have a dedicated research analysis that could dive into what is truly hundreds of thousands of lines of data. If you look at test scores going back 10 years across a student population of tens of thousands of kids and, hundreds and hundreds of standards, we can dive in and really look at a pretty fine grained level. So the data is there. We publish all that data. People can do some of that analysis themselves if they go on. But obviously within the department, because we have student specific data, we can do much finer data analysis with those resources. So that's kind of the academic side. So I think in general, it's good news. New Hampshire tends to perform really well compared to states nationally. From a career perspective, it's really difficult to get data. When kids leave the K-12 system, we don't necessarily have the authority or the systems at the Department of Education to track where those students are going if it's not something basic like, 2-year or 4-year college attendance. We get data like that through things like the National Student Clearinghouse, through partnerships with the university system and the community college system. So we know about the kids generally that are going on to college and university. What we don't really know is who are the kids who are staying here and going into a career field and being successful in that. I think that's been something nationally that a lot of states have started to look at. Rhode Island specifically a few years ago received a grant to partner and pair their data with Department of Labor data at a state level. And so they were able to have their employment data at DOL match up with their student data from their K-12 systems. And so they could see, hey, here are all the kids who, excelled in algebra in high school, and 10 years later, here are all the career fields that they're employed in the state. And they kind of have a matching system between those. We don't have anything that does that. And we would need probably some pretty specific legislative authority to do that level of data matching. We do everything off of state student IDs, and we don't have access to things like student social security numbers for good reason, right? And one of the reasons why we do everything off of state student IDs is that protects student PII. Whereas labor and employment data is all based off social security number. So you'd have to have some level of state system that could do matching between those two to be able to look to see if we want to look at academic performance here and look at where kids are 5 years, 10 years, 15 years out from high school in a career field. That's sort of the level of like data analysis you'd have to do. And we just don't have that right now. I think it'd be very interesting. I will say if there was a way to do that with our state systems while simultaneously protecting PII, it's very interesting data, and there are several states that are doing that.
Okay, and a follow-up on that. Yeah, I think that's something that would be very interesting to pursue, and maybe we can even get some ECS.
Yeah, of course, we have the bill on analytics. The analytics personnel, that's a separate bill from this one that would help. And I've asked for years to follow certain cohorts of students through these grade levels. We used to have third grade reading differentiated aid. We had no way of tracking whether it did anything or not. We didn't follow the cohort. It'd be nice to be, and we've talked about this many, many times, being able to get down in the weeds, and hopefully that person in analytics could help us out with this. But you're talking also to have that connecting software packages that can talk with each other. And I think we need to go that direction for sure. Talking with labor and talking with DOE and finding out where they're going career-wise. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, and we may even be able to find out some of that information too from what we're seeing at the community college system, what we're seeing at the university system, in terms of any sort of remediation or sort of foundational, classes that any of the incoming students might need to take leaving high school. But I guess my question was also, going at the list here of the learning areas that's in the packet with standards ranging in date from 2001, so 25 years ago, to I think the most recent one is computer science in 2018, and then we don't have any academic standards for engineering, technology, or personal financial literacy. But when you look at that list of learning areas and list of standards, are there things that drop out like, hey, you know what, we better make sure, and I'm just making this up, that the social studies curriculum guidelines really need to incorporate the Holocaust and genocide studies. It's missing. Of course, that's also 2006, standard, so it's pretty old. But something that even in a mathematics standard, has something changed in math that high school kids or that elementary kids need to be touching on today that they weren't touching on 10 years ago. And I know math breakthroughs in math don't necessarily happen every few years. Sometimes they're centuries apart. Calculus was what, in 1860s type of thing. I think it was.
Yeah, I mean, early calculus. Yeah, you're going back to
mid 1800s.
Yeah, well, Isaac Newton, I think, had some of the earlier pieces. Yeah, so 1700s.
Yeah. And sort of modern math. I think is more like Einstein's time, 1920s, 1930s, things like that, and a lot of that is reserved for graduate level. Graduate level studies, but going through here, things that I think all happen to all of us during our lifetimes are going back to the chemistry example, where we teach it, where atomic structures get taught in a Niels Bohr sort of sort of thing. And it turns out, well, that's actually not how it works. And then, you learn like in junior, senior year in high school, or maybe in college that, no, that's really not how it works. It's really, really different. But do things like that ever crop up, I guess, and require maybe a more urgent update rather than, well, let's just pick the oldest one on the list and update that?
Well, can I cut in on that?
Yeah.
When we've been looking at the aggregate scores, and we've seen there's a drop off in geometry at the 8th grade. We've seen that waterfall effect with mathematics, whether it's geometry, but we've never had the analytics personnel to really do that dive in there and find out, is it all of geometry, or is it certain portions of geometry, or is it, and that's what I hope we can determine here through that type of person that we, on the other bill, which we have. But I'm also equally concerned that with these frameworks, which are not current, and we look at the social studies and those subject areas, geography and history, and have been added in recently. And I used to work in curriculum over in the state of Maine and wrote that curriculum, the curriculum frameworks for the social studies for the state of Maine. And we saw that there were real holes, and we had to just write this all over. Unfortunately, it was bought out from underneath me by Down East Magazine. But I think what we got to do is get these curriculum frameworks updated with current information, so when a district's looking at these, they know what they need, what direction they have to go when they're modifying their curriculums. They may not have to go out and buy a whole new curriculum, may only have to change portions of it to, like you said, out of the 25 concepts or standards, they may have 20 good ones right there. And the other 5 they can drop, they're no longer being assessed. And so I'd like to see if there's any kind of a support from this group right here now. Is there support in our trying to move forward with this legislation, which we have in the back page, which is just draft format? And I've shared this with Nate, and I'd like to go down through these items on it while you're sitting there, Nate, and read them and see if we're good with this, whether it's worth our time to try to make and add this on to a bill that we may have in possession. So going to the last page there on page 9, line 9, it says, there is hereby established within the Division of Education Analytics and Resources, under the supervision of the Director of Education Analytics and Resources, the position of Curriculum Frameworks and Academic Standards Coordinator, who shall be responsible for the following functions in accordance with the applicable laws. A, design curriculum frameworks that serve as a guide and reference to what New Hampshire students should know and be able to do in learning areas pursuant to 193E2A. B, maintain, update, and improve refined curriculum frameworks with each learning area pursuant to, same thing. Assist school districts in maintaining, updating, improving, and refining curriculum that presents educational goals, broad pedagogical approaches, and strategies for assisting students in the development of skills, competencies, and knowledge called for by the minimum standards of public school approval and curriculum frameworks for each area of education identified in, once again, 193E2A. Analyze data to evaluate curriculum frameworks' effectiveness, research elementary and secondary curriculum and instructional methodologies, provide technical and curriculum development support and services to school districts. And it just goes on and says, there is hereby established in the Division of Education Analytics and Resources the position of what we just talked about, who shall be a full-time classified employee who shall hold the such position by reason of education and experiences. Going on, C, appropriation. Department of Education, there is hereby appropriated to the Department of Education sum of, I put down $140,000, it was $160,000 last time we talked, Nate, somewhere between 70 and wherever, for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2027, for the purpose of funding the curriculum frameworks and academic standards coordinator position established in RSA 21N:15. I didn't put 14. Right now it goes through 13. 14 is the other bill which we have So that have to be worked out with legislative services, whether it's 15 or 14. The governor is authorized to draw a warrant for said funds out of any money in the treasury not authorized otherwise appropriated, and this would take effect 60 days after passage. Is this worth our pursuing?
Any question?
Yeah.
So I remember the bill they went through before, and what I'm wondering is, it looks like it's already gone through the Senate. When would it be amended?
This would be a new bill, not adding on to the other bill.
Oh,
So this would be, for example, if education funding has two bills right now from the Senate,
oh,
we could add this as a non-germane amendment to one of those bills and pass it back on to the senator here. And she can say, well, I don't like it, or I do like it, or I like both bills, and
okay.
whatever.
Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. I was trying to figure out how it would happen. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And the other question I had is, it's a very specific piece of legislation referring to a position. Is that the normal way that we would go about trying to have this done, is to actually establish a position in state law?
That's the way we did it. That's why we've been advised by legislative services to do it in the previous bill. And this is pretty much the same format as that other bill it was, only it's different content. But,
Or it's done in the budget.
pardon me?
Or it's done in the budget.
Or it's done in HB2.
So the purpose would be to put a little more meat on it, to say this is what we really want, than to,
Yeah, this is the only way we could do it right now, unless you were doing like Representative Luno just said, you
Yeah.
flip it into HB2.
right?
And then you put them, or HB1, you put the money in there.
Okay.
And it may not be stated in statute, but this is one way we can do it, given our circumstance where we are today.
Okay, thank you.
So I would, I think this makes a lot of sense, but I think we got to straighten out curriculum frameworks and academic standards. Just looking at how this draft is written, it focuses on the term curriculum framework, but it's titled curriculum framework and academic standards. What do you think we should do?
Given the conversation we've had today, and you and I had talked a little bit about this already, but I would probably edit, in the bullets A through F, I think I would change each place where you see curriculum frameworks to be academic standards, because that's really what you're referring to with these, with the exception of bullet C. I think what bullet C describes is what you could call a curriculum framework, which is the educational goals, the broad pedagogical approaches, the strategies for development of skills, competencies, and knowledge. Those are the things that the teacher is doing and kind of preparing in their classroom. I would call that work a curriculum framework that the teacher's doing. But I think in A, B, D, E, and F, where we talk about curriculum frameworks, we really mean academic standards.
Question? Maybe not for this piece of legislation, but it really sounds like we have to go back through the law and straighten that out, and which is an enormous amount of work. I know that previous bills you've tried to go through and pinpoint that, but if this would suffice for this position, I would be in favor of that, but definitely we should clarify it at some point.
Agreed.
You can write that one.
I'm not going anywhere.
The only suggestion there, though, Nate, would be, if now we're redefining curriculum framework to essentially be what the teacher does in terms of pedagogy, curriculum, assessments, things, summative, informative assessments, all the stuff that sort of wraps around, hey, am I moving these kids along during the day here? That maybe we should come up with a completely different term, or just call it what public school teachers do. I mean, I'm just cautious
it's
about
broad.
redefining a term
Yes.
that's already had some confusion.
Was this language suggested? Who?
A lot of that language just comes right out of statute, the way, with the pedagogical and all that stuff, that's right out of law. My concern was, for example, like an A, design curriculum frameworks. Curriculum frameworks are approved by the State Board of Education.
Academic standards are.
Academic standards are.
The problem is we have some academic standards that we've called curriculum frameworks.
Yeah.
And that's where the confusion kind of comes from. But really, from a definition perspective, they're all academic standards.
So in the statutory definition, academic standards, what a student should know and be able to do in a course or at each grade level.
Yep.
So
And
that
that's
could
really
stay
what
the same.
A is. Yep. Yeah, that wouldn't change.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
What's that? Yeah, that's my own
Now, we can always reference that area of statute for the definition.
at this committee, really.
Now, the issue is going to be that this is not a budget year, and where we're going to come up with money. By doing this, we may be saving some money in the long run by better defining, and we might see achievement increase too.
I think right now you're seeing.
Yeah, I know it. I agree with you, Senator. We gotta have something concrete here. It's worth an effort, though.
Mhm.
You don't have to get out of the house before it gets to you anyways. So, okay, so if there's, what we can do, we can work on looking at language here. But conceptually, I think we're not going to take any kind of a vote here right now. We're just saying, hey, we're good with the idea. Let's try to move forward and see what we can do with it. Okay, it also conveys that, we need to do something with these frameworks. The administrators out in the buildings are saying, what are you doing? That was asked of me the other day at a meeting right here in this room. What are you doing? I said, nothing that I know of. So good. So I guess, is there anything more on this part of our docket? Because we have one other item on the docket for today.
Just one question, please. So Ed Policy and Administration heard HB 1571, which also requiring the Department of Education to review statewide academic standards and curriculum and make an appropriation thereof. Would this interact with the bill that we already passed?
Well, what you're doing over in policy is you're saying, department, go ahead and do something, but what resource do they have to do it? And right now, we all are asking the department to hop when we ask the hop and the jump when then we ask them to jump. And we're not giving them any resource or funding or personnel to make it happen. What this is doing, it's basically saying, here's the person to help do what you've just said there in that bill. And it's going to give the updated materials, hopefully in the future here, to our school districts, which are shouting for this. So I don't think we're ever going to see it if we continue to rely upon the federal government to provide the 80% funding for all your employees over there, 75 to 80%, wherever it may be. And the other 25% is provided by either states or grant monies from a different direction. And it doesn't give them the tools which they need to do what we're asking them to do. This is something for the state, not for the federal government.
Correct. There was some money associated with 1571. I'm looking at the totals right now, $600,000 for helping with coaching and support. We did put money in it, and it is, is it in finance now? I don't know where it is. Did they vote on it?
Yeah, I don't know. Or I just looked it up. They were supposed to.
I would venture to say if there's 600 grand in it. I don't know.
I guess my point was that we also recognize the need for this, and we tried to help provide some funding sources so they'd be able to do their job. It's
The original fiscal note on 1517 was a little over $1 million.
Wow. Okay. I'll bet my paycheck on that. That's $100. Okay, so, at any rate, okay, we'll try to work something up here. Thank you very much, Dr. Green.
Thank you.
The next item on our docket here is, this is an issue which education funding dealt with the other day. And it was the costing of inadequate education. And it looks at the resource elements which comprise base cost. And the resource elements were basically decided upon back in 2008 with the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee for the Costing of Inadequate Education. And the Education Funding Committee moved forward the bill, I think it was 1121, as it was stated back in 2008. Now, I mentioned to Representative Luno that I understand he presented an amendment which brought in other elements, and that we would discuss this. And I think the issue when we're talking about these components or elements is a larger issue than what we can do in a meeting like we had in that hearing there. And some of the other elements, for example, Senator Ward, one of the elements which was proposed was a nurse. Should a nurse be part of the base cost? Is a nurse directly related to the health and wellness component of 193E2B? Excuse me. And another one that you brought up, superintendent services. Is superintendent services directly related? Back in 2008, the report stated, no, they're not. Have things changed since then? And so I'll open up the discussion right now.
So, sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. The amendment that we proposed the other week when looking at House Bill 1121 essentially listed out what are called the necessary specific resource elements that the Conval Court used in costing out the base cost for an adequate education, and that was after I don't know how many days of expert testimony from people in the field, people with national backgrounds in K-12 public schools. But it basically included all the costs that school districts, every school district in the state, takes on. Mr. Chair, you brought up nurse services, and that one does stand out as maybe being a little bit different in the Manchester School District than I think it is in every other school district in the state, because I think in Manchester are nursing services provided through the city.
I don't know how Manchester's doing. I know they have a director of nursing there, and that's hired by the school district.
So that may be true, but director of nursing probably isn't multiple nurses for every 1,000 kids or something like that. But I wouldn't want nursing services to be left out of the necessary resource elements, because Manchester's public health department does it a little bit differently in Manchester than every other school district in the state does it. And clearly the students, I mean, we talk about this all the time when talking about special education. They have more complex needs today, right? Mm-hmm. than they did, a decade ago or 2 decades ago or 50 years ago. And to not include something like nurse services, to leave that off this list, I think is something that's not good for kids, and it's certainly not. It's certainly something that every school district realizes is important to their daily operations. Superintendent services, and there's obviously been a lot of legislation going through focused on superintendent services, whether or not we should have one elected superintendent per county, or whether we should have SAU consolidation, or whether superintendent services can just be a contracted service, but regardless of how you actually do it, superintendent services, you certainly need to have a for lack of a better word, a CEO that's in charge of the school district, that is the last stop before something goes to the school board or goes to the state board for adjudication. And so I think it's certainly a key operational management position, and it's some superintendent services is something that's required for school districts under current statute.
Superintendent services.
Superintendent services.
Services.
Right.
What are those services?
It's listed in the statute, but I think it goes. It's basically all the things that superintendents are responsible for, and we have it numerous places in the statute that the superintendent or their designee, is responsible for making all sorts of decisions. Whether it's decisions specifically about a disciplinary event or final disposition on an appeal before it goes to the school board or whatever it happens to be, and there's certainly costs to that for school districts. So that's why those two items are in the amendment that we had proposed.
Chairman Lott, could I ask, oh, sorry. Can I just speak to the nurse services? I know that Representative Luno mentions children with special needs, but there's a whole lot of children that don't necessarily are identified as having special needs. There's a lot of students in the schools now that have allergies, asthma, and my own son in particular, type 1 diabetic. If we don't have nurses in those schools, there are medical events that could happen that could send those kids to the hospital and maybe even die. So I would hate to see those not included. It's really essential to have a nurse in those buildings.
Well, what we're trying to do is look at what is the cost of adequacy, not the cost of running a school. And adequacy references those 11 learning areas. And it doesn't have as a learning area management of the schools. Now, the only one of these two areas which have, I would, give some attention and time to is the nurse. But the way it was written up and described in 2008, they said the nurse is not directly related to the instruction of health or wellness. And whereas the nurse is there for other nursing responsibilities, which are aside from the instruction in the classroom. So in the superintendent services, the superintendent very rarely ever gets into a classroom. We do have principals and administrative assistants, which are part of that base cost. They're in it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how different it is, though. I mean, just looking at the list, and this is the list that we have in our amendment that we proposed, but and it comes right out of the Ruoff Court. Costs for teachers, benefits, student-teacher ratios, principals. So, yeah, principals do get into the classroom. They're evaluating teachers, administrative assistants. School counselors. So school counselors are on the list, but the school counselors aren't part of the 11 193E2A content areas. Library media specialists, technology coordinators, custodians. Custodians aren't in the 11 content areas either. But if you're going to have a facility and maintenance I think is in the current list and the list that came out of this committee, then you're going to need somebody in charge of the facilities, and building principals in charge of the one building, and a superintendent is in charge of a whole lot of things. It's everything, the entire operation that goes on in all of those buildings and outside of those buildings. I did not put on things that were not included in the Conval decision. So it doesn't say, football coach. It doesn't say an athletic director. Although I think those things are really important because just from what we heard from Dr. Green this morning, that time is the currency of education, and getting kids to come in the door every day, making sure that they're not hungry, making sure that that they're there for a reason, there for their reason, and you know what, they're going to attend classes and they're going to get benefit from being in those classes during the day. I think there's a lot that goes in to what I would consider to be the cost for an adequate education well beyond the 11 core content areas, but I'm just sticking with the list that the judge, came up with.
Well, when you look at that area of statute we're talking about, the resource elements, it references back specifically to those 11 elements. So I would say that something you're going to tie to adequacy as it's stated and written in statute right now would have to reference back to those specific elements, those criteria, those learning areas. And I don't see how the superintendent, I can see how the principal does. In fact, you have a lot of teaching principals. The administrative assistant, yeah. Now, there are some elements which are not directly related. These are non-personnel elements. And that's so stated in that 2008 report. There's personnel elements and non-personnel. The non-personnel elements are instructional materials, technology, teacher professional development, facilities, operations and maintenance, and transportation. Those were put in originally in 2008. The personnel elements which are in the base costs right now are teachers, and then you also have the 20% specialty type teachers. Those are your PE, music, art, those which come in and take care of the prep classes, whatever, throughout the school day. Then going on down to guidance counselor, library media specialist, technology coordinator, custodian, that's it. And so I put this on the doc because I indicated I would, but also that I think that if we're going to start expanding this, we're going to have to start referencing other parts of statute other than just the learning areas. Mm-hmm. And whereas a superintendent has no involvement with the learning areas, just like your business manager doesn't have it, or any of those directors which you have given those superintendent services to. And are they certified as instructors? Now, your position that a custodian is not certified is correct, and your custodian though is in those rooms cleaning and working with the kids, lunchtime and all. So I guess I'm not there sold on the superintendent services at all, because that's a broad area. It could be even done by a CEO, as the senator has mentioned here to my right. But the nurse is the only one that may fit if the nurse is being used differently than it was back then. I don't know if it is though.
I would say that definitely the nurses are definitely involved, at least in the schools that I've been visiting and the ones in my Seacoast area, because of the prevalence of a lot of those debilitating diseases that I mentioned before. And they oftentimes are right there in the classroom, especially if a child, especially the younger ones when they start out and they're just trying to figure out how they adjust to their blood sugars. And so thank you.
Mr. Chair, I would think that the nurse would be ideal in the classroom to teach health issues. I mean, she doesn't have to sit in an office and just wait for people to come in because they have a cut in the finger or something, but she could be actively involved in teaching health issues. And the same thing with the business manager. I don't see why the business manager could not also teach personal finance to the kids.
I think a business manager would probably be qualified to teach, or could be credentialed to teach. But I know the business manager in my school district certainly doesn't have the time available to be in the classroom. But in fact, many superintendents do spend time in the schools and in the classrooms, and are much more visible today than I think they were decades ago. It's no longer, I think, the ivory tower, and I'm trying not to use that as a pejorative term, but I think superintendents are much more out there in the school community than they ever have been before. I was just looking at the 2008 report. I pulled it up, and the word principal is used like 28 times in that report. The word superintendent is used 3 times, and only with respect to interviews that the department had with every superintendent from every school district, and nothing at all dispositive about a superintendent not being associated with the content areas. It just wasn't. It wasn't even discussed. It wasn't even considered in the 2008 report. So I don't think there's anything in that report that you would say concludes that superintendents just aren't part of the the specific necessary resource elements in a school district needed to provide adequate education in these 11 content areas. Certainly just the same way buildings, just the same way transportation, just the same way so many of the other things are. I think superintendents are there too. It just wasn't considered as part of the 2008 report.
I'm Chairman Ladd. I'm sort of new to the party on this one, the 2008 report. I haven't really had a chance to look at it, and I'm not really sure what you're referencing, but I would just say, just in general, it's 2008. We're in 2026. Educational standards have changed dramatically over the time. And if we put so much reliance on a report that was produced 18 years ago, it could be really different right now. So
It's like the curriculum frameworks.
Yeah, I understand that. And so, well, I put this on the docket because it deserves discussion. And it's something that perhaps we ought to be considering and looking at here. Maybe in the next meeting, we could just bring in a copy of that 2008 document so you can have access to that, and take the discussion further. At this point in time, superintendent services, to me, is a category which it could be director of transportation, it could be the director of business, it could be food service, it could be a whole lot of things that the superintendent, you're required to provide superintendent services in a school district.
Includes business administration, right?
Yeah, includes all this. And as long as the superintendent's done that, that's why I think we've seen in a lot of these districts, it's been handed off to somebody else, and things been not so good. We've seen that in some districts here.
Sure, but I don't think it's fair to say that the superintendent of schools is going to have the time to also be the business officer for a school district either, even in a small school district. So I think when you talk about, and I'm glad you sort of reminded us about this, Mr. Chair, when the statutes talk about superintendent services, they're not talking about the superintendent.
That's right.
They're talking about the services that are provided underneath inside the SAU. So the business administration, the payroll, human resources, the student services director, all that type of stuff wraps into superintendent services, and that's why we don't. That's why in the amendment that we put forward, and in the amendment you put forward, it doesn't call out specifically a student services director or business administrator. It's because that's folded under superintendent services. And I mean, I don't know how a school district would be able to meet IDEA requirements if it didn't have a student services director who was responsible for making sure that that students were identified, were receiving the services under their IEPs. So that's all part of superintendent services.
Well, the special ed component is not under the base cost, it's under differentiated aid. And that's the $68 million.
I would just add that, remember that you do have the IDEA, but you also have what are the 504 plans, which are children at risk or children that have other disabilities that aren't under an IEP. And those services also need to be provided by the school. So, I mean, it's a graduated.
Yeah, and if the base cost is essentially, the walk-in cost of a student that doesn't require any specific services, that school district still has to provide has to have the framework for providing, compliance with IDEA and all that. That's
Screening services.
Yeah,
Too.
yeah.
These are kids that haven't even been, they're all part of an integrated approach to treating students where they are.
And so that's done through differentiated aid.
no.
There's no, they don't get.
The IEP is done through differentiated aid.
ELL as well, and also free and reduced meals.
Screening services are not. So anytime, so you have, like we would have anytime the kindergartners would come into the class and they would be screened. They would have the speech person would come in, the OT, the PT to see if they have any disabilities that could be addressed before identification. None of that is covered under differentiated
Labor
aid.
costs are paid under differentiated aid special education.
Not,
All special education staff.
but they're not all paid by the differentiated aid that's being awarded to the school.
The differentiated is non-targeted money.
I would need
That's
some.
part of the concern, but
Okay, we can agree to disagree on that.
okay. So Senator Ward, 1121 is coming your way.
Okay, looking forward to it.
And this is the bill, how you cost out an adequate education. It's basically your base cost. And it was basically for what, FY 26, $4,266, something such as that. And it's to the dollar now. It's no longer to pennies. And and it increases by a COLA of 2% each year. So that's how it works.
Okay. When is it coming?
Well, it's 1121. Was that on the docket next door today, or did that already float out of here? It came out of the House floor when it came out of funding. Then it went
Did it go
to,
to finance?
then it goes to
I
finance.
don't know if it does.
And well, let me
I don't
look.
think it wasn't an early bill. I don't think it went to finance, right?
Yeah, maybe it's not. Let's see.
It said it was referred to education finance on the 12th.
In the Senate.
Are we in the Senate? It doesn't.
Well, Ed Finance
Finance
is a Senate
yeah.
committee, so,
I think you may already have it coming
yeah,
at you.
I think
Oh,
it's,
okay.
I think it's in the
already,
Senate.
I think it's already coming up over your side.
Okay. So that was just checking today to find out what the bills were that coming over. But
Yeah, that's one. The
Okay.
cost of an adequate education.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's in the Senate already.
yeah, I think so.
It says it on the docket.
Okay, so
so.
you got it. So you got it.
I see.
It's yours. I don't know. Do you have a net funding committee, right? Or
Yeah, we do,
so that would go to Senator Murphy's committee?
probably.
Yeah.
All depends on how they allocate those
Yeah,
things, but
okay.
I would think so.
Alrighty. So before we get out of here today, we ought to say when's the next time that we should meet? Or should we call the chair
Oh, let's look at calendars.
Okay.
Well, I mean, when are you looking at for committee or our, ed funding committee meetings?
See, I want to get a hold of how many bills we've
Yeah.
got and what we're going to do with some of
Here,
these right
can I
here.
just look at this for a second?
Yeah. So,
So what,
we have session on the 26th and 20, see, 20,
probably 25th and 26th.
well, 27th is the EFA Oversight Committee I got. 26th is session. April is looking pretty good.
Yeah. Let's pick something in early April.
Monday, the 6th, I got a historical meeting. That's for the Capitol building. Well, do we need to meet here within the next 3 weeks? I don't think so. Yeah, once a month sample.
So Murphy schedules, Murphy doesn't have his things on a regular day. It's
Yeah.
just,
He just does it, yeah.
whenever he has time, it's just gonna say,
Okay.
let's do
All
it.
right. So if we're not going to meet in the next 3 weeks, why don't you sort of
I think it's wise because,
kick it around and figure out when we can all get. But why don't we take a couple of actions or take one action out of this? Do you want to bring forward that the draft as a potential non-germane amendment to a Senate bill?
oh, I intend on doing that.
Yeah. And so in doing that,
But I want to probably make some changes.
replacing the
as we
curriculum
discussed.
framework with academic standards,
Yes.
change the title
A,
to reflect
B.
that. Yeah.
D and E, was it?
Could we make some sort of a motion giving you, our support and the changes as discussed? Would that be helpful?
I think the minutes can just document.
Yeah, I
it
think the
as a-
minutes is all we need.
Yeah, so it's A, B, and D would
A, B,
would replace curriculum framework with academic standards. And then we get rid of the word curriculum framework from the title of that position and in the,
so you have
Title of
curriculum
the bill.
frameworks in C as well, but that you want to keep.
well, you know what, I hear what Dr. Green is saying, but I think using an ambiguous, an already ambiguous term to describe something new, we might be better off just public school. Standards for public school approval. You get rid of the word curriculum framework. It's not even necessary there.
But see, we have curriculum frameworks mentioned in the law elsewhere
But
right now.
we're using them as academic standards.
Yeah,
Even in C, can Dr. Green look at C? Because I think what you were referring to is all those things teachers do could be called curriculum frameworks, but I think in that fourth
well,
line
we,
on
we,
C.
we can't conjecture what academic curriculum frameworks mean. We got that defined in law.
I don't think it is.
Yes, it is. It says curriculum framework means an organized plan of study that serves as a guide and reference to what New Hampshire students should know and be able to do in learning in a learning area, and identifies the academic standards aligned with learning area pursuant to.
Academic standards is defined in law. I think curriculum frameworks. All right,
Dr. Green is here.
yeah,
It's in law.
okay.
It's in law.
I would suggest an edit to law as well, only because curriculum frameworks talks about being what students should know and be able to do, and academic standards are defined as what students should know and be able to do. So they're both defined essentially as the same thing within the law.
Yeah, academic standards in a course or grade level.
Yeah.
And then the curriculum frameworks. Again, it doesn't, yeah, should know and be able to do in a learning area.
The way that we would interpret it is that they're referring to the same document only because they're defined in almost the same way within the statute. So it's not the worst thing in the world if it remains in the statute, but we wouldn't view it as two separate documents at the department. We sort of, if they remain the same way within the current statute, we would just call the academic standards or the curriculum framework, but it would be the same document.
So what do we do up on this bill right on line 6? It also references curriculum frameworks do not establish a statewide curriculum.
Because they're not curriculum.
Well, I understand, but you're still using that
Yeah.
word, curriculum frameworks.
I would replace it with academic standards if it was me. Yeah.
So you're suggesting that everywhere we have reference to curriculum frameworks, we write in curriculum standards,
Academic standards.
academic standards, I mean.
That's what I would do.
That may be a nice sort of housekeeping edit to
Are you just talking in that one statute that we're
I would
referencing here?
probably do a control find of
Yeah.
all 600 pages or so, just see where it appears. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't mind doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would surely clean up a
Mhm.
mess.
And if we find that it's being used some way that's inconsistent with that, then we should know that right away
Yes.
too. That would
Yeah.
be important, I think, to bring to your attention. Or if you're going to look at this, that would be a huge help. And yeah,
I can take a look at that.
that'd be
Yeah.
great, Nate.
Yep.
You have this copy there. Would you look at 193E2A and look down through, because curriculum frameworks are mentioned several times here. On the second page, they're mentioned down on line 33.
So this is a case where it's referencing in lines 32 and 33 the minimum standards and the curriculum frameworks for each area of education. In that case, those curriculum frameworks would be the academic standards
Yeah,
because they're coming from the minimum standards.
okay.
So again, interpretation-wise, the department would read that, and we would just know we're looking at the academic standards.
And on line 4 on the next page, page 3, where it says the curriculum framework shall serve as a guide, we have academic standards shall serve as a guide and reference.
Yes. Yep. That's how we would interpret that.
Same thing on line 6.
Yes. Yeah, because the standards are themselves a standalone document, but they do not constitute a curriculum. A curriculum is sort of the what the teacher is doing within the classroom. It's the selection of materials and textbooks. It's the particular pedagogy. So the standards do not represent a statewide curriculum. A statewide curriculum, for example, would be something like what you see in Texas, where the State Board of Education says this is the textbook for fifth grade social studies. They've adopted a statewide curriculum.
They're pretty specific down there.
Yeah, New Hampshire doesn't do that. We don't have a history of adopting curriculum materials and mandating those at grade level, and that would be separate from
So lines
standards.
21 and through 23 would be deleted.
I would just remove the definition. Yep.
Okay.
I think because when you look at line 17, it says academic standards means what a student should know and be able to do. And in line 22 of the definition of curriculum framework, it says what New Hampshire students should know and be able to do. So it's the same sort of definition just being repeated there.
Is there any substance or reason to keep the latter part of line 23 identifies academic standards aligned with learning area pursuant to, with each learning area?
No, because I think it's trying to connect two documents
Okay.
that are the same document to each other.
This was the old statutory language we had years ago.
Yeah, and I think this comes from, you know, a time where some standards were called frameworks and other standards were called standards, and it creates that confusion where it seems like there are multiple things when in reality we have two names for the same documents.
That's very confusing. Okay. We're good with it.
Thank you.
Anything else for the committee today? Okay, so we'll meet probably in about 3 to 4 weeks, and I'll find a date that's good for everybody here. There's only a few of us on this committee, so we should be able to do that easily. So we need a motion to adjourn.
Just one more clarification. That 2008 report, and can it be sent to me electronically?
Oh, I'll get it to you.
Jen's going to do it for you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, we have a motion to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Okay, that motion was made by, second by,
You're at the end of the agenda. You can just gavel it out anyway.
I know it. That's right. We're
So
done.
let's just do it that way.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
all right, cool.
Okay,
So I have a question for you about the Holocaust. But we had a bill that had to be part of instruction.
yeah, it is. Well,
Why does it say
it's
here it's missing?
because there's not a, it's identified in 193E2A, right? It's the,
Gregory, yeah.
it's listed as one of the 11 learning areas. If it's now, is it part of social studies?
It was, so I was part of the committee of Holocaust.
Yeah.
We went through and developed probably about 3 or 4 pages of standards for it, and they were inserted directly into the minimum standards.
Okay.
So they represent probably more something like academic standards. I think